This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com. Last week, people thought it was one of our most thoughtful episodes ever. We tried to do our best to pay tribute to Pat Patterson. We were a day late, but we weren't $1 short. Most people are saying it was a top 5 all-time show for us, Bruce. A lot of people are even saying it was our very best show. What was the feedback you got about last week's tribute to Pat?
Whew. I can probably speak a little better today than I could. I couldn't even tell you really what was on the show last week, but I got an overwhelming response on Twitter. I got an overwhelming response from so many people at TV that I came up that I never knew, that had never talked to me about listening to the show before, and came up and just hugged me. And it's like I got condolences and well wishes from people as if I lost, my dad or my brother. And Pat was the equivalent, to both in many, many ways. And the overwhelming outpour of love. Man, we got the greatest listeners in the world.
Oh, gosh.
We really did.
No doubt.
It's beautiful. And I felt it, and I was so appreciative of it, but it just was, it was hard. It was hard. We got through it. You know what I mean? We got through it. And like I told you tonight, before we started, I don't know I'll ever be over it. I said, God damn, do you want to do part 2? Do you want to continue on? I've got a gazillion Pat Patterson stories, and maybe, now's the time. And you played last week with doing the, whatever the hell you call it, of his life. And I said, well, let's try and get through it, and maybe I'll do a few diversions along the way. But I think that Pat Patterson's contributions to the business that he and I loved so much is worthy of 2 shows, is worthy of 3 shows, is worthy of years of shows, because frankly, every show that we do has a Pat Patterson touch to it, because he had that much influence in the business and was one of the most influential people ever in the history of wrestling. So, yeah, the response was overwhelming, and I thought it was pretty cool, because it just shows how many people really truly loved Pat and realized how much he gave to the business.
In case you haven't already figured out, we're calling it yet another audible here. It's funny because earlier this week we dropped a sort of best of Pat Patterson, because Lord knows we've told a bunch of stories about Pat Patterson over the years, and he's been our special guest at a lot of different shows and events like Starcast and the Roast of Bruce. And so we didn't play any ads last week when Bruce was just sort of pouring his heart out. So earlier this week we had to deliver a full show, and so we saw, you know what, let's just do a best of Pat. And I sent Bruce the notes for last week's episode that we postponed to this week, Armageddon 05. And he pulled it up when we're getting ready to record. And he said, man, I just ain't into it. Can we talk about Pat a little more? And guys, here we go. I'm excited to do it. We had 46 pages of notes. We're going to try to get through most of it today. As you said though, Bruce, we could talk about Pat. We get lots of questions like, when are you guys doing a Vince McMahon episode? Every show is a Vince McMahon episode. And in a weird way, every show is a Pat Patterson episode, right?
Absolutely. And that's something that, Pat doesn't always get the credit that he deserved. And by God, we're devoting another one to him, because I love talking about him, and he's just such a wonderful human being.
As we talked just 3 days ago, Dave Meltzer tweeted out, I've come to the conclusion that Pat Patterson is the second most influential person in the North American wrestling industry of the past 40 years. The sad part is it should have been obvious 20 years ago. I thought that was pretty cool for Dave to acknowledge the contributions of Pat. And I think Triple H said something very similar. Of course, we know who they're talking about as number one, but number 2, right behind Vince McMahon. That's kind of hard to argue when you really think about how big his influence really was. Wouldn't you agree?
Pat's influence not only in the WWE, but in the territories preceding the global expansion of the WWE. Everywhere that Pat went, Pat had impact. And from San Francisco to Minneapolis to New York, Montreal, everywhere that Pat went, he had tremendous influence and was able to make change and adapt and create. Once Pat's days in the ring were over, Pat fell right into the creative role with Vince, and I dare say nobody could touch him.
Chris Jericho has referred to Pat in the past. I believe he used the phrase, he's wrestling's Yoda. I thought that was such a great description of Pat Patterson. Is he far off base, or do you agree with that assessment?
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that, because no matter what it was, Pat had an opinion about it, good, bad, or indifferent. And even if it was bad or was something that Pat didn't feel and or see, it was something that Pat would weigh in on and create something better out of it. It was always what the fuck? We always do it that way. Let's do something different. Fuck them. And he would find ways to make things different. You wouldn't have, if Pat Patterson were an agent on a live event, you wouldn't have the same show night after night.
Right.
That's boring to Pat. He would change it up every single night just to entertain himself, when he was, entertaining the live audience and entertaining the locker room and trying to keep it fun for the talent, so that, they didn't have to do the same old shit every single night. And I remember there was Mr. Perfect and Shawn Michaels had this incredible program. They're working all over the place. And we went to the Nassau Coliseum one night, and Perfect and Shawn were having a match. It's for the Intercontinental title. And we're sitting there, and on the way there, and Pat starts laughing, and he says, "Brucey, let me throw this at you. What if instead of they have not one match, they have 4 matches tonight?" And where he was going is we did the match, and they had a finish. He ran down a second referee. No. Perfect cheated. He did this, he did that. And they restarted the match. They restarted the match with 2 referees. Now this time the 2 referees are in there, and bing, they have a big, the fucking both referee knocked out. You send the 3rd referee down there. You start the match over. Then they have a count out. Then they say, "Fuck you. We're not going to end it like that." Then you have but it made basically 4 matches out of the damn thing. And it was so much fun, because he basically got everybody on the damn card back involved somehow, some way. And you just didn't have a match that had a finish. You got a match that basically turned into 4 matches with 4 different finishes. And it was a nice roller coaster ride. And that's just the way that he would look at everything on a nightly basis and take it there. So that was his way.
Talk to us about
it's just not true.
What about The Rock? He gets a lot of credit for being the guy who really discovered The Rock.
Thank you for bringing that up. 100% Pat Patterson. And to set the record straight too, I was doing talent relations at the time. Pat called me about this kid, Dewey Johnson.
Yeah.
And his father, Rocky's kid. Okay. Rocky Johnson's kid, man. Shit. It's fucking 3rd generation. Holy shit. He goes, "He's been playing football in Canada. He's really down. I've seen him in the ring. Oh my God. He's a natural, but he needs to be trained." He goes, "I've, done some things with him and shit." And asked us if we would take a look at him. Brought him to, I think Houston was the first place that we brought him to for a television taping, worked with the Brawler. And that was Pat. Vince at the time was like, he goes, I don't know, what have you. And then signed him to a developmental deal with same time we signed Mark Henry and Akam Albrecht and all those guys. But 100%, Pat Patterson was the guy that introduced us to him. Pat was the one that brought him in. I credit Pat 100% for discovering The Rock and having the confidence in him from day one. And yes, Pat definitely pushed The Rock, and rightfully so, and had a passion for The Rock, and loved the character and loved the human being, and was there for him every step of the way. So, Pat 100% recruited The Rock, got him his first match, whole 9 yards.
And he wrote in his book that, that Rock had an in at the FBI, but he wanted to try wrestling first. Isn't it remarkable to think how differently everything is? Not just wrestling, not just the company, but just pop culture, in Hollywood over the last, 2 decades. Had The Rock actually pursued his quote unquote in at the FBI?
Yeah, no shit. It'd be a different world, wouldn't it?
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.